Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But KSJE is now listener supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm DelSheree Gladden, and I'm a USA Today bestselling author with more than 30 published novels. And on this week's show, we have Shannon Baker, and she's going to be talking about the newest book in her Kate Fox series. Shannon, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. This is great. This is a return visit, so I'm really excited that you asked me back. I am the author of the Kate Fox Mystery Series. It is currently, the latest book, Exit Wounds, was just published in November, and it's currently contracted through book 10. So I've got some more stories to write on that. I'm a Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers Writer of the Year a couple of times, and that's about it. I live in Tucson, where it's sunny and warm and really nice on this January day, so I'm sorry for the rest of the country that's not so nice.
Yes, it's a bit chilly up here in Farmington. So Exit Wounds is the most recently released, and then you have book 7 coming out pretty soon as well, right, in a couple of months?
Yeah, that one comes out in April, and that's a double back. And then I just last week turned in book 8 to my independent editor.
Well, I think that's probably very nice for your readers, though, that you're able to get so many books out and keep them on their toes and entertained.
Well, I hope so. I hope they like it.
I'm sure they will. I really enjoyed Exit Wounds, and even coming into this mid-series, I wasn't able to read the first 5, but I really enjoyed the story overall, and I thought it did really nicely just as a standalone as well for someone just jumping into it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's really hard when you're doing a long series because your character has to grow with each book, but you don't want to, as you said, if you jump in the middle, you don't want to confuse your readers too much. I find it challenging.
That is a challenge, how much to recover, how much to remind the readers. I think that's a challenge anytime in a series, but I would guess especially 6 books in, even a little bit more challenging.
Well, especially you don't want to bore your readers that have gone with you all through the book.
Exactly. So this book is largely set in Nebraska with a few brief trips to other locations like Denver and Chicago. But the overall setting for the series is the Sandhills area in Nebraska, which you're familiar with, right?
Yeah, well, I lived out there for 20 years, but it's been 20 years since I lived out there. So I recognize that I'm getting a little far removed. The things we did out on the ranch 20 years ago, they probably don't do things the exact same way. Although, things change slowly out there, so it isn't that big of a thing. When I was out there, ranchers were doing things the way that they'd been done for 100 years. So, things haven't changed that much on a lot of the ranches, but a lot of the other ranches, for instance, I have some friends that are really successful ranchers, and they've modernized everything. So they don't do brandings the way we did them 20 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago. They use, instead of a hot branding iron, they use dry ice, and they just...
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the hair turns a different color. The hair gets bleached out, but you don't, brand. It's much more humane. So, sensibilities have changed a lot in the 20 years since I've been there. I wrote this scene. Which book was that? That's not Exit Wounds, the next one, Double Back. And I set the opening scene out of branding, and I described the branding in total detail, and then I read it and thought, oh, that's horrifying. If you're an animal rights type of person, that's really horrifying. My sensibilities have changed a lot in the 20 years I've been gone. So I went back and took out a lot of that stuff. Just, people don't need to be horrified by what happened.
It's interesting how things like that change over time and
Oh,
reacquainting yourself.
So before I was published, I wrote a book, and my protagonist was a vet, and the opening scene was a C-section. No. The opening scene was she was pulling a calf, and I talked about her sticking her arm up the back, and it sounding like boots in mud, and I just went through this whole thing, and a New York editor read it, and she just looked at me and she said, "You cannot write this. This is horrible." Well, and I didn't think anything about it because that's just when you're out on a ranch, that's the way life is.
Yeah, you're used to it as a part of everyday life, and for a lot of other people, though, it's like, oh my gosh, that's how that happens.
Yeah, that's awful. Yeah.
That is an interesting part of balancing the reality of the setting with keeping your readers interested without going into too much of the nitty-gritty.
Well, the very first Kate book and the very first review I got, reader review, he hated the book, and he said it was cruel because it's the start of a spring blizzard, and she has calves, and she says the calves will be okay. I might get some frozen ears and frozen tails, but they'll be fine. And he said, that is the most callous thing I've ever heard, and it's cruel and it's mean. And when I wrote it, it was just reality. It's like I didn't see it as mean and cruel. It's just the way you raise cattle.
Yeah, it's a part of it. I mean, there's the natural world and weather. Like, those are just realistic things that someone living in that environment, you learn to deal with. And it is shocking at times for people who are just unfamiliar.
Well, 20 years out, I am a little softer-hearted about stuff because, I talk to rancher friends that live out there, and they say things that I think, oh, that poor animal. So, my sensibilities have changed a little bit too.
Yeah, and I think you see that even with your characters going throughout a book and being 6 books in, and even, having not been able to read the whole series so far, some of the things that you mentioned with Kate, referring back to earlier books, and even just in that way, you could see how her character had changed and developed by some of the events that she had been through. And so I wanted to ask you about that process. And you mentioned this is, for now, planned to be a 10-book series.
Yeah.
How you go about either planning or just organically letting Kate's character develop?
Well, that's the thing that's been challenging. Well, everything's challenging about writing for me, but I didn't plan all the way through. And I only planned, so you're in book 6. In book 5, I had an arc that went through, so from book 1 to 5, there was an arc or a mystery that went all the way through, and it was solved in book 5 about her niece. Kate had a niece that went missing in the first book, and she went, the whole other books have been subplot of finding her. And that, I didn't plan very far ahead. In that book, I knew the niece went missing, but I didn't know why. And it took me 2 or 3 books in my own mind to figure out why she went missing and where she was. So it would be nice if I was like a J.K. Rowling and could plot all the way through, but boy, I don't plot that far. So right now, thinking that the series will end at book 10 and I'm at book 8, I think I know how I'm going to end it. But, I might change my mind because every time I get an idea for a book, I change my mind when I get there. If I think, 3 books ahead, she's going to do this. And by the time I get there, it's like, no, that's not really what she would do.
I'm the same way, and it usually works out. But I think that is what you mentioned, like getting to that point and then being like, no, that's not what Kate would do.
Well,
and I think that's a fun thing about writing is that the characters really do take on their own personalities, and they grow and they develop along with you. And sometimes those plans don't work out because they're not the same character that they were when you made that plan.
That's right. They change. But this Exit Wounds, I think, was the easiest of all the books for me to write. And I don't know why. It was just at the end of book 5. Maybe it was at the end of book 4. Whatever, Kate, it's in the last scene, the denouement, and Kate's just talking to her mother, and her mother says, well, you're like me. Once you love once, you never stop loving. And that just planted the seed. It's like, what happened to Marguerite? What was that first love that she has forgotten? And it just started this mystery, and all of a sudden it came to me about, because her mother's all this, hippie, free spirit, love your neighbor, but she's always been weird. There's always been something a little off with Marguerite. She's never been diagnosed in the books as I was going to say passive aggressive. That's not it. Bipolar. Mm-hmm. But she obviously is. She's got all kinds of psychoses that have never been diagnosed, and all of a sudden it came to me why she is the way she is. So this book was the easiest one to write and probably the most fun I've ever had.
It was really an enjoyable storyline, even though there was some darker elements to it. I really stayed engaged throughout the whole story and, page after page wanting to, what's coming next? Because you had a lot of good twists and turns and surprises in there. But also the focus on the family and those interrelationships between, because it's a big family. There's, I'm getting out, 9?
She's one of 9. Yeah, she's one of 9.
And so that's, I grew up in a fairly big family, not quite that big, but, just trying to deal day to day with all your siblings and the different personalities and trying to manage all of that without going crazy sometimes is a challenge. And so that was a fun part for me of being like, oh my gosh, I recognize so much of this from my own family.
I'm glad. I thank you for that, because I didn't come from a big family, but when I wrote my first series, I didn't expect it to be a series, and so I set up all this stuff because I thought it was a standalone, and then I sold it, and the editor that bought it, they said, is it a series? And I said, yes. But I had written myself into some corners that I didn't know how to get out of at that point. And so when I plotted the Kate Fox, when I started her, which she was Kate Bear at the time, but when I started that book, I thought, I'm going to give her all these brothers and sisters so that the series can be a long-standing series, and I'll always have a character to focus on. So I planned that on purpose, but it didn't necessarily turn out that way. It gets confusing from time to time. I have readers say, there's just too many people. I can't deal with it. But I think it's fun. I know them all now.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciated that it wasn't all of the family all of the time. It was in this story, her older sister and a couple of the brothers come in a little bit, but it's sections of the family where the story is. And I think that was nice because it kept the focus on their relationship, because she'd had some lingering issues with her sister from previous books, and that was kind of a big focus there in the middle of also their relationship with their mom and everything that was going on with the mom as well.
Yeah. It's well, and in a small town like that, the characters in the town are also like family. So, there's a lot of reoccurring characters that keep coming back over and over again. Like the next one coming up in April kind of deals with Newt and Earl. And I don't know if they're too much in the book you read, but Newt and Earl are these 2 bachelor brothers that consider themselves, they're junkers. They go to all these clean out sheds and dig through people's junk piles. And so they know a lot of things, and they're quirky characters. They're a little odd. They're very odd. But they think they're Kate's CIs, confidential informers. So in book 7, they're featured. They're the featured characters instead of a brother and sister. So that one was fun also, but it was a little more complicated. It's got a complicated plot.
That's an interesting side of writing mystery is, there's so much to go on with the characters and developing them and keeping them interesting and engaging. But then you've also got to build this mystery that makes sense, that keeps the reader guessing and isn't too easy. How do you go about planning the mystery side of your story?
That is the hardest part for me. That is really, because what I'm very interested in is characters, and how they react, and putting them, their feet to the flame, and seeing what happens and how they react. The plotting of the mystery, and when you have a long series, a lot of mysteries focus on a murder, but this is a county of 5,000 people, and actually the county I lived in was 1,000. So I made this one way bigger, but there's only 5,000 people, so it's hard to kill people over and over and over again. You get that Cabot Cove thing. And I just assume that if you have readers that love mystery series, they're going to give you some leeway on that. They're just going to say, yeah, okay, we have to have a dead body, so it's okay. But yeah, creating the plot line, and then in a place that small, finding the murderer is difficult, because you don't want to have your outsiders are suspect anyway, and they're noticeable, so you can't have people just coming in and killing people, and yet you don't want your citizenry shooting people or whatever it is. So yeah, I find it very difficult. If anybody has a good idea for a plot, just shoot me a line. That'd be great.
Yeah, that is something that I think, being set in a small town, it is really hard. And small town mysteries are very popular right now. But yeah,
well, from your lips to God's ears, yeah.
That is something that I can't remember. That was something me and my kids were listening to on a road trip, and all of a sudden there's a new character, and my son was like, well, I mean, he's got to be the killer, right? We've never heard of him before. and it kind of made me laugh, and I thought, yeah, that is a tough part of trying to, in a small town, because it was a series set in a small town as well. And if it's, you can't have your main cast of characters constantly being the ones running around killing people or getting killed. So there is that fun, challenging balance of bringing in and keeping characters in a small town mystery that aren't so obvious of who's going to do what, and who's going to die or be the victim or whatever. So yeah, that I can definitely see that being quite the challenge in writing a series.
It's really hard, because I know so many mystery readers, and I know that they read extensively, so it's really hard to fool them, because they've read all the tropes. They know, and they're looking for, oh, it's the one you least suspect. Well, they're looking for that, and so it's really it's fun, and when one of them says, and maybe they lie to me when they say, oh, you fooled me, I didn't see that coming. It just is like ringing the bell, ding, 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 yeah. But, and often in a couple of these books, I've got halfway through and decided to, because I plot before I start, so I always have an ending in mind, and I've gotten halfway through these books and thought, oh, that's not who did it, it's this person. So that's always fun when that happens. It's frightening, because you go, uh-oh, how am I going to set that up?
Yeah, I've got to go change a few things. But that is, I think that with mystery, because I'm normally not like a big plotter, but when I did start working in a little bit more mystery, it was like, okay, I've got to sit down and figure things out a little bit more in advance than what I normally do. Because otherwise you kind of end up with a lot of problems you have to go back and fix later.
I'm in awe of organic plotters or pantsters. I can't figure out, I would be in the middle of the night wide awake in a panic, just if I didn't have at least one ending in mind or one direction I was going. I can't imagine writing a book and just going, well, today I'm going to get up and see what happens. And it's about half and half. It's about 50-50 of who plots and who pantsters. But wow, I'm in awe of you guys.
Well, that's funny, because I feel like if I have things too planned out, then it makes me anxious. I'm like, oh, what if I get to some point and I need to change something, and then I've got to change the whole rest of the story afterwards.
I was interviewing Mark Stevens, who is a Rocky Mountain fiction writer, which you should think about interviewing him for this, because he's right in your corner. He's in Mancus. He lives up there.
Okay.
I'll give you his contact over time. But I was interviewing him the other day, and he's got a book that just launched in January, and it's going gangbusters. And he is a pantser, and he said, if he plots too far ahead, then he gets bored. He wants to be surprised with what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trying to keep yourself engaged sometimes in what you're writing can be difficult as well. And I think that's not necessarily even like, you're not writing an interesting enough story. That you as the writer, if you're not challenging yourself to, try new things or push a little further, explore different tropes or how to twist something that's very familiar to readers, but still stay within what the reader expects. And I think with mystery, that's a little bit tougher because a lot of people do have very set expectations when they read mystery.
Absolutely.
Depending on what type they like, but you want to keep it fresh, you want to keep it interesting and surprise them. And how do you approach that with keeping, especially, midway through a long series, not letting things become repetitive?
Well, just by doing that, I guess, just by being aware and trying to say, well, no, that's happened before. In fact, I was just discussing this with my husband this morning because it turned in a book. I'm now thinking about the next one. And I said, well, she could, the murder victim, it could look like a suicide, and she's the only one that thinks that it isn't. And I said, but that's so cliche. That always happens. It's always, I think it's a murder, but no one else does, so I'm going to go investigate off on my own. That's been done a gazillion times, and I've done it, I think, twice in these books. So trying to twist it, but then that makes each book, in my opinion, just a little bit better because you can't take the first or second idea that comes, or maybe even the third or the fourth. You have to keep digging and digging to get to the new idea, and that always brings up something that is a little bit more fun to write. And it gets harder, and it should, because you should be challenging yourself to do better and to come up with a story that hasn't been told the exact same way before. I mean, every story's been told, obviously, but you want to put as you said, you want the reader to discover something new in each book.
Yeah, I think that focus on the individual characters and really taking the time to develop those characters makes a huge difference. Just, in regular life, two people can go to the same event and come away with a completely different experience from each other because, so much of who they are and what they've experienced in their life colors each and every experience. And I felt like that with your characters, especially with Kate and her older sister even, that they, grew up in the same house, same parents, all of that, but they became two very different people. And their experiences really brought a lot of depth to their characters and how they work together, often reluctantly, throughout the story. And just seeing the differences in the way they handled things and approached things really brought them to life for me. And I thought that was really nicely done. You don't get to know a lot of the other siblings in this book, but those two really stood out. And especially even as you approach the end, and I won't give anything away there, but seeing how they both handled, how the story kind of partially resolves. There's room for it to continue on through the later books, but just having that uniqueness in the characters really gave, I think, a different light to the story and helped me as the reader, see that these characters really, were real in a lot of ways. Like I could see these characters as people, and it really helps me invest in them and their relationship with each other and what they're going to do moving forward.
My plan is working. Thank you for that. Well, they were raised they were raised in a really weird way. So they have all these children, and the mother is completely dysfunctional. So she's an artist, but she'll disappear for days at a time. She'll go down into her studio and start working, and she'll just be gone. She'll be vacant from the family. And then when she comes back, she's she's just weird anyway, but she's very loving, but in a very hands-off kind of observant way. I'm just watching my children. I'm not raising them. I'm just watching them, kind of thing. And the father works on the railroad, which my husband did before he retired. And so I know that lifestyle a lot, where he'd just be gone for 48 hours, twice, 2 or 3 times a week. So vacant in that way. So the way the children react, the oldest taking charge and raising the younger children, and some of the younger children, like Kate just forgives everybody. She just says everybody was doing their best, and I'm fine, and I always felt love, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the youngest child saying, this is bullshit. The way we were raised, people shouldn't be raised like that, and I'm not going to stand for that, kind of thing. And then the rest of the kids, somewhere on that spectrum. So yeah, I played around with that a lot. And I'm still playing around with it a lot. I don't think we're done with Kate's mom yet.
That's interesting. I really enjoyed the style of this mystery, that it wasn't cut and dried. It was very layered, I think is a good word for it.
Well, I never did a dual timeline before, so that was new for me too.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, with going back to Marguerite's younger years. Yeah, what was that like, trying to develop an older
I did some research
time period and setting?
Yeah, she the crime she commits when she's a young person is completely the same. There's a crime in history that actually happened like that in a different location, but the exact same way. So I just lifted that because I wanted that authenticity, and people that, like my editor, knew that crime intimately. She said, I live in that city, I know that crime, and so she also came back and gave me more tips on how to get it just right and things. So people that are familiar with that time period in the 70s will know what crime that is and will recognize it. It was a really volatile time. It was just slightly before my time. Slightly before my time. I'm old, but I'm not that old.
Well, it came across really realistic. And it's interesting because the last interview I did was also set in the 70s, his book. So that was kind of fun to see that time period from 2 different perspectives. But yeah, I think that doing that research, and especially being able to talk to people who lived through a particular era, really helps lend some authenticity to developing those settings.
Plus, I had never been to Chicago before. I ended up getting to go to Chicago for a nephew's wedding, which was so much fun. And so I just used the same settings. I was only there for 2 days, so I couldn't do a whole lot. But then I would text him and say, how long does it take to drive from here to here? And what road would you take? And it turns out it takes a half hour to get anywhere in Chicago. It's amazing to me.
Well, we are just about out of time, but yeah, I just wanted to ask you, where can people find you to stay up to date on this series and any of your other projects?
My website is shannon-baker.com.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.